Michelle,
Daniel,
OG
OG
Rose.
Rose, and we do have something different in the background. Same spot as last time for those who found it last time, and it is the IC books that Marcus got it. He's right. It was those.
From the 90s.
Yeah,
Yes,
from the
he can find
'90s.
books.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've been talking a bit about possibility and probability.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic because Daniel and I were talking about it the other day where it's so yeah, it's an all or nothing thing. I think that our brains can do where we either just decide none of that's possible, we won't do any of
Yeah.
that, or we want to do it all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
what's possible, right? It's possible to do this, but the question then comes, but is it probable?
Yeah.
Like, does that make most sense to do that?
Yes.
Um, and I think that a lot of times the I do wonder if this also can come a little bit from like a good spirit of childhood, like where you feel like I don't know, there's a greater touch with possibility, but the thing is that the reality of it is that so much is being taken care of for you by your parents if you have like loving,
Yeah.
kind,
Yeah.
caring
Yeah.
parents, that you don't really have to think about the probables as much, or the
Right.
things that you just can think about doing and then do. It just feels like the possible is the right litmus test for if you should do it or not, because
Right.
you can, like you have more uh because the constraints, like if we talk about the relationship between constraints and limits and freedom and emergence, all that, like those things are already set up because of your parents and your family and all of that. So but when you get into being the adult, then you have to start to make those decisions, like you have to create those things yourself.
Mm.
And I think that, yeah, we like possibility because it's usually actually more in the abstraction of things. And so then but we can always just sort of blame somebody else if it doesn't go as well as
Oh yes.
we wanted it to, or whatever, or if it was too much or whatever it was. But really, being an adult does seem to be to accept and start to use probability as your rubric and your litmus test, not possibility.
Yes.
Because, yeah, like you said, like lots of things are possible.
Yes.
Now, again, the other side of it is just to say, nothing's possible, I'm not going to do anything. And then to think about, then you can think about probability as saying that too,
Mm.
when it's not.
Mm.
It's saying what,
What is
yeah,
likely?
yeah, what is likely and
What could, in a realistic sense?
yeah, and what sort of are the things we need to take into consideration that to inform the decision and make it really be the best that it can be, because doing what's possible is usually on a whim and urge to do something you enjoy and like you
Mhm.
desire, and you want to make it happen and you want to do these things. Nobody wants to do something that ends up causing family drama
Yes.
and causing
Yes. But
problems
it
and,
happens all
and
the
feeling
time.
stressed and didn't yeah, but it happens all the time. And I think it's true that a lot of times it's because we're thinking about what's possible, not what's probable. And one last thing I'll say is this relates very, very much to the creative process, right? A lot of times it's possible to just on a whim, write the next best novel or something like
Yes.
that, but that's not probable. The probability really lies on the airs on the side of paying attention to the small
Yeah.
and how much that makes a big difference.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
probability would say, well, that's probably not likely that you would just have a sudden urge of energy to do that,
Yeah.
but maybe you will, but it's not probable.
Yeah.
And is it sustainable? No. So your best bet in terms of probability is just do little bit by little
Yeah.
bit
Mhm.
over
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, anyways, I'll send it back
Yeah.
to you,
Well,
but it's a big deal.
I think this causes untold conflicts in relationships and family. That this distinction between the possible and the probable is at the
Yes.
root of many, many problems.
And
Please.
misunderstandings when, say, somebody is maybe a bit more in touch with the probability. And I will say, I think that tends to be people who maybe have a bit more experience with like the land, and like, because you have to pay attention to the weather, you have to pay
Mhm.
attention, there's more things you're having to be like attentive to.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
technological essence errs on the side of
Possibility
possibility,
absolutely
because it
does.
doesn't have to take, it's
Yeah.
like, well, as long as you've got like electricity,
Yeah.
which you
Yeah.
probably do,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
you can do it all, but you really can't. And now you can do, that we've had discussions on this before. You can do, that's a funny thing, when you accept probability, there's a lot you can do,
Yes.
but you have to get very, very honest and realistic with yourself. Like I've talked about with Corey and Rudy
Mhm.
Family, she'll talk about doing an audit,
Yeah.
do an honest audit of yourself and your life. So, anyways, I'll send it back to you. But I do think people who are more aware of the probability stuff often get vilified
Yes.
because they're like, you're just wanting to you're the party pooper.
Yeah,
You're just
yeah,
saying we,
mhm,
we should consider this and this, or we
yeah,
should whatever,
yes,
not do it now or
yes,
whatever. And then
yes,
this is why it's such an interrelational dynamic that we're talking about with possibility and
yes,
probability.
yes,
But really, that person doesn't is not saying no. It's a lot of times just having an awareness of things that maybe we want to overlook in our
yes.
idealism about what's possible. So
Yes.
I'll send it back to you.
Well, so there's a few things. There's often a whole lot of talk in psychoanalysis and different people about facing negativity and suffering negativity. And the examples can be, bad things happening or whatever. But actually, on the micro, this might be the most common example of where people refuse to face negativity. It leads to all sorts of trouble
Mhm.
because they want to stay in possibility, which is
Yeah.
self relating and there's no negativity.
Right.
Probability is when you say, well, this could happen, this is likely. And it's for the possible to encounter the probable is a moment of negativity because it's a restriction
Mm.
and you don't like it because the brain loves self-relation. When
Mm.
you're just thinking about what could happen, well, it's play. It's like it's a bad kind of spurious play because you can come up with all sorts of scenarios and you can just kind of follow what you feel. And of course, you're going to naturally follow what feels best and you're going to go in that direction. It's just kind of this free movement that you have. But when somebody says, well, it's, that's unlikely to be financial, smack. And it's a negativity, and what we tend to do is blame the person who talks about the probability,
Mhm.
right? So this is an example of on a micro facing negativity in a way that's not. Sometimes the talk about facing negativity is so macro
Mhm.
and large and
Mhm.
abstract that it can kind of not be applied. But here is an example where if you get habituated into possibility, you can be very resistant to talking about probability because you
Mhm.
encounter that as as a limit, and
Mhm.
we don't like limits. What are we going to say?
Well, it just said it's interesting because again, there's a weird irony or like inversion that can occur where when you really get grounded in the probable, again, this actually opens the
But
gates
that's the irony. If
for
you face the
yeah,
negativity, you get negentropy. Like
yeah.
if you stay in the
You get the
possible,
sublation, right? You
yeah.
get
The
the
irony is the probable gets you the infinity unlocked in all particular things.
it's
Like
like you get it's this first set it's this,
first things first
yeah,
principle.
C.S.
Yes,
Lewis first things first, second things also. Because if you put the possible first,
you get
what's
neither.
possible,
Yeah.
you often get neither. But if you put the probable, then you
You can
also get
also get the possible.
yeah,
In
yeah.
fact, you can discover things that you didn't know were possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where like this it's this beautiful impossible possible reality unfolding
Yes.
from the probable, right? And
Completely.
probable again, this would have to do a lot more with, your own cultivated awareness of constraints,
Yeah.
et cetera, that can lead to the saturation, to the
Yeah.
access to all
Yeah.
of the goodness and all of that. So,
Yeah, and again, I just would like to say that I think little interactions between the possible and the probable define many relationships constantly that lead to trouble
mhm.
and problems, right? Um, so we could use the example of going to the creek, as just a live example that stimulated this conversation.
That's true. Yeah, well, we should make it very. I mean,
Because
again, this
this
is
is
very real.
so there's a conversation about going down to the creek, right? And, the idea that could you go in the middle of the day when it's hot? Yes, it's possible. But then if somebody says we could go in the evening, because it would be warmer,
You mean it would be like
I
it would
mean,
be
cooler,
cooler?
it'd be cooler. That can be, and it's more likely to have a good time because the kids aren't gonna be miserable. That can be met as a negativity,
For
as sa
context, you have to walk 20 minutes to
yeah,
it.
you have to
So
walk 20 minutes, right? And so when you're
through
talking
through
about
through tall grass. Yeah.
yes, and so, this little interaction of saying, "Well, it's possible you have a good time,"
Hmm.
is not the same as, "Well, what's probable for having a good time,"
Right.
right? But what ends up happening is the person interprets the probability as not wanting to do it or no or
Hmm.
denial. And so that kind of exchange because that defines conversations 24/7 for people and they get hurt and they're like you've got like the probable is actually trying to honor the situation,
Exactly.
honor the event. But
Honor the real factors of what
yes,
it
but when
means.
somebody brings up it's really hot right now and it won't, may not be a it might be difficult, then the brain naturally says as, "Oh, you just don't want to do it."
Yeah.
Like
And
as
that's
a
the thing.
total denial
Yeah. So the possible would be like, but it's possible to go to the creek in the middle of the day when
and
it,
have a good time.
mind you, when it's pretty much the hottest.
Yes.
It's possible, right?
Yes.
So let's do it. And if it's hot,
Yes.
we can just cool off in the
Y-
creek. All
Yes,
these
that's right.
idealistic, which yes, that's true. But you're also having to factor like you're bringing up, a group of people with the young children.
Yes.
You're walking through tall grass. You don't have an off-roader.
Yes.
You didn't even bring really,
Yes.
you might, or how are you going to get all your, if you want to bring towels and
Yes.
swim, whatever, then how do you bring that stuff down,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. Like these are all the real factors of it. But in your head, it's easy to just paint this picture of it being, you know, and this is the funny thing because it's like, well, we'll just we should be tough anyway, right?
Yeah,
Like
we
there's
should
this
be
kind of
tough. You start
you
more. You
start
add
moral,
some
yeah, you
ethics.
add
Yeah,
ethics to it, and
yeah.
like, well, and that's a funny thing as we're talking. So basically, I'm just fleshing that scenario out more. The possible ones to say, well, yeah, we can do it, and yeah, is it possible? Yes.
Yes.
Would you have as good of a time as if you waited when it's a little cooler, when you can, rely on the sunset
Yes.
to, again, help with the temperature, and maybe, maybe the also the factor is you've already eaten all your meals. You're not doing it
Yes.
in the middle of the day where like to eat
Exactly.
lunch. Do you not eat
Yes.
lunch? Are you bringing lunch?
Naps.
Now, are you going to bring that? Yeah,
Yes.
naps of children. This is the thing. When you're a parent, there's so many realities of like
And I think it's
timing.
very true
Yeah,
that when you're a child, you're mostly habituated to possibility, and you're told you can
absolutely.
be anything and anything is possible, and then you're an adult and it's actually about probability.
Yeah, it's probability. It's
And the
it's
secret would be arguably, the sooner a child gets that, the higher the probability they'll really thrive and succeed because they
mm,
can begin to focus sooner.
yes. So yes to all of that. So taking the probable into consideration is for the sake of honoring a good time at the creek.
Yes.
But a lot of times the gut reaction to that is you don't,
Yeah.
you just don't want to do it, or you
Yes.
don't want us to have fun, or you don't want us to
Yes.
go to the creek,
Yes.
whatever, which is
And you're
not
saying
true.
we're not tough. You're saying we can't handle it.
Yeah,
Like then
yeah.
you bring in ethics and it just spirals
Oh,
and
it's a mess. It's
spirals.
a mess. Yeah.
This happens
So
all the time.
yeah, when really like the person bringing up the probable probably would love to go to the creek too. It's not anything about like, do you want to go or not, or could that be a nice
Yes.
time or not? It's about probabilistically, is that can you make that the most optimal
Yes.
condition that you
Yes.
can?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and as we were talking, just one thing really quick, I was thinking in the background about how this relates to how the societal script. What's so fascinating is the societal script often though calls like a lot, especially like creative work and such
Mhm.
things, they often call that like daydreaming, and you're doing, that's really not possible. um and I guess I was just wondering what you think about that, like, because I do think the society does this funny thing where it mostly does the possible kind of mentality of
Mhm.
like, let's just,
Yeah.
this is possible, because again, the possible relies on projections of ideals, right?
Yes.
Whereas the probable says what's actually
Yeah.
happening and what do we need to shift or tweak or redo or recalibrate so that we can have, again, the most optimal experience of what this is that we're desiring. um I feel like society does tend to do that projection of the
Yes.
ideal, but then it also will do this thing where somebody trying to make something happen that's never been done before, um it's called like, then they get really kind of like, it's almost this like, I don't know if it's a pendulum swing or something, because then people get like, well, that's impossible. It's like, what? You can't literally,
Yes.
like, say,
Yes.
let's just take somebody wanting to write a novel. Let's do that. Okay, so the person's gonna work at it a little bit every day, and then suddenly, it catches wind that people
Mhm.
hear about it, and then they're like, well, that's not, that's impossible. It's hard. There's a lot of books out there, a lot of writers out
Yeah.
there. It's hard to, don't, you might never get that out there, and you
Sure.
don't want to put your time and energy into it, even though obviously somebody doing that is usually also doing another
Yeah.
job or
Other
this or
things.
that, yeah, other things too. So but what do you think about that, like what's happening there? Because I do think
Yeah,
there's kind
that's a
of
great
a,
question.
maybe it's a, I don't want to call it bipolarity, but there's almost like a two, there's like a, again, possibility is usually what people err on the side of, but then suddenly people clamp down when it comes to trying to work at things like in the Kaizen sense, right? In
Yeah.
these little steps that are
Mhm.
building,
Mhm.
people say that they throw
Yeah,
that out as
yeah. I
impossible.
mean,
So
it's a
yeah.
great question. What I will say is, again, I would just stress to people, like, pay attention to how many exchanges you get with people if you're in a marriage or etc. And try to think it through the probability possibility distinction. You'll
Mm,
see it everywhere. So,
mm,
for example,
yeah.
the male says something like, I want to go, we're going to go to this park. Excuse me. Then we're going to go to the store and play basketball. And the woman says something. Well, doesn't the child need a nap or something? Oh, you just don't like basketball.
Mhm.
That kind of thing happens all the time. Or it's saying, well, you just don't value basketball. Or you can say, well, we can make it work. And you see, the issue is the main reason why thinking in terms of possibility is inescapable because it might work. It always might work. The person stressing the possible is by definition always right.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so then actually it's just probability that once out of the 10 times will work out, which can be used as evidence that it can work out, therefore should do that forever. Now you're
yeah,
stuck thinking possibility for the rest of your life, and
yeah.
you're going to there's going to be a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of conflicts, a lot of problems that were unnecessary. But what were you going to say?
Well, this just to, because I really want people to hear even more examples, and that's what we're doing right now. But this is how this comes back to philosophy too, right? We talk about this a lot. Is it possible to go throughout life without
Without
philosophy?
philosophy,
It's
sure.
possible.
Of course.
It's possible you won't need it.
Yes.
but it's very, very probable, especially in our global pluralistic age, that
That
you
you will
will
need it.
need it.
Yes,
You will
that's
need it,
correct.
and
Mhm.
it will benefit you to do it. So
Yes.
this is another possible probable distinction. Another
Yeah.
thing, like let me just create another example. Like, um, if you think about like, oh, it's possible for me to be able to do, um, I don't know. I'm trying to think about this in terms of like a practical daily, like your daily life live. It's sort of
It's
like
usually
this.
busyness. I mean,
Yeah.
people a lot of possibilities say, it's, we could do X, Y, and Z, and they're very busy all the
Mm,
time, and
mhm,
busyness and
mhm.
possibility thinking go together a lot.
Yeah, they do. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's possible. Well, yeah, but is it probable and is it
Is it good?
good? Like, is it
Yeah, because you
beneficial?
lift the question
What's the
to
quality
thriving.
of that?
Is it
Yeah.
possible? Yes, is it possible thriving? Very, very unlikely,
Mhm,
right? Just because of all
mhm,
of the balls that have to
mhm.
be juggled,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, and that maybe makes me think too about like, I know the word intentionality can be usurped in different ways, but there is a way in which it's like, is it possible that you just take care of your stuff without a structure?
Right.
Yeah, but again, you're hoping for like little energy
Yeah.
surges versus
Yeah.
what's probabilistic is that you create a certain structure
Yes.
so that
Yeah.
you ensure that feed yourself and do the things you need to do and have, maintain a certain level of
Mhm.
energy
Mhm.
throughout the day,
Yeah, and I think that gets to your question on the artist.
Mhm,
Generally speaking, a lot of people will stress the possible today, but when
mhm,
they get to the future, they just want to stress what they consider the probable. When actually it should be the exact reverse.
mhm.
So, they'll
Is that
want
is that maybe that fits in with the artist thing? Oh, sorry, you're
yeah, yeah,
addressing
that's
that.
what
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
The pipe dreamer,
Yeah, that's
kind of
right.
thing.
So there's this weird thing where in my experience, many people who are quick to say something like creativity won't work out are actually very prone to plan their day according to possibility, but their futures and what's going to work on based on how they define probability. But here's the irony:
Mm.
the more you talk about the future, the more you actually should talk about
Yes,
possibility.
yes, yes,
And the more you
yes.
talk about today, the more you should talk about
Probability.
probability,
Yes,
right? So
yes,
most of
yes.
us get it
That's very good. That's
exactly,
a really
most of
helpful.
us actually get it backwards. And in my experience, most like the great artists, or in my opinion, people who really take it seriously, they are 100% aware that it is very unlikely to work out. That's why they create routines or are very kind of discerning on how they use their time to increase the probability of it, right? Because when you have a possibility, if there's a possibility in the future, well, you're not going to realize that future unless you start doing things today to make it probable,
Absolutely.
right? But the
Absolutely.
artists who think in terms of like only possibility,
Mhm,
they don't ever narrow and discipline today to make that possible future more probable.
mhm.
And I think what ends up happening with a lot of like more busy people or whatever, there's a whole lot, they're actually kind of living their life according to what's possible.
Yes.
And they become busy, or they end up in a lot of conflicts because they're not taking the determinations of reality seriously, and then they close their horizon of possibility relative to what they believe is probable. But their idea of what is probable has been taught to them or absorbed
Exactly.
by the
Exactly.
society, right?
Exactly.
Um,
That's mhm,
and actually, then you kind of lose both, right?
mhm,
Probability is actually no longer, so you're actually misapplying probability to the future, which you really can't do very well.
mm.
And you're also misusing possibility because you're applying it to the now. And so it's a first thing. You put second things first, you lose both, right? You
Yeah.
want to lead with probability into possibility, not lead with possibility according to what you think is probable,
Yeah.
right?
No, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, no, absolutely. And did you have something else?
No, go
Okay.
on.
Well, I wanted to say that something off screen we had talked about too was this interesting. It's a sort of a wordplay on particular because what happens is possibility sometimes leads to a person. And again, there's a place for possibility, like Daniel just defined, but there's this when you're leading with possibility and not probability.
Yes.
What you can fall into the pitfall of that is to become very particular.
Oh, yes.
Like you get kind of mean about, like,
Yeah.
in a
You
sense
get
you get
mean.
kind of
Yeah.
pushy,
Mhm,
particular, like you picky
mhm.
about what you want to, what's this thing I want to do?
Yeah.
We can do it. It's possible. We got to. And if you don't,
Because the only way to stop that is to bring in a realism or determination of which is antagonistic to the entire horizon of thinking
yeah,
possibility. I have
yeah,
to introduce determination, which goes against your entire way of experiencing reality
exactly.
as possibility.
Hmm,
So
hmm.
there's a almost kind of like just a very deep reaction against it.
Yeah, and that's true what you say, that this is a type of tearing with the negativity, actually, because
Yes.
your possibility basically can live in that, again, that
Happy
happy
place.
place, and
Yeah.
so you're kind of the determination is saying like, hey, Like, and if you can tarry with it, then you see it as a gift actually and a
Yes.
blessing. But if you
Mhm.
if you just reject it, and only see it as like, oh, that's an imposition, or that's just gonna, that's not gonna let me do what I want to do or whatever,
Yes.
then yeah, you're not tarrying with it, and you don't see it as, there's no supplative potentiality
Yes.
there. But there really is a supplative potentiality there,
Yes.
and this is the supplative potentiality for particular, right? So there's the being particular in leading with possibility, but then there's also the redemptive particular is when you get particular about what does
Yes.
the thing actually mean. So again, like with the creek, like, okay, tall grass, it's the mid of summer, do we don't have an off-roader right now,
Yes.
like this, all these things are like the particulars of the actual
Okay.
experience that should determine and help you determine what time of day you should go, or if you should go, when you should
Versus
go.
getting picky in possibility.
Exactly. So it's, you get, being particular in the picky sense is leading with possibility, and then actually observing and paying attention and acknowledging the particular details of what something may entail or does entail is when you lead with the probability.
Yes.
It's looking at the particular, and you have to look at the particular. This is like the partial object
Yes.
kind of
Oh,
like
yes.
particularity of the
Yes.
person. Like
Yes.
particularity is so crucial to actually living like, oh, I don't know, a fuller reality,
Yes.
of, becoming a full human being, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's really important, and an interesting distinction there. So um
Well,
yeah,
the irony is the more particular you get, the more it actually becomes infinite. Like you move from women to a woman to Michelle.
right,
Michelle is infinitely deep, right? There's
right.
always that's the thing about a person. So the irony
Hmm.
is that in the name of possibility, because you can see it in relationships. Oh, if I marry one person, I cut off my possibilities or
Right.
whatever. Well, ironically, that assures you don't have possibility
Exactly.
because
Exactly.
because you don't have depth. Like at the end
Hmm.
of the day, you're only going to get true infinite possibility in depth. But
Exactly.
that means probability has to lead to possibility, because that's
Hmm.
another way to put it. If you start with possibility and have probability, then possibility is contained now. Like it, and so ironically, it's like less possibility. It's like
Hmm.
less. But if you lead with probability, you got all the possibility in the world. So possibility is more possible when
Yeah.
it's second to probability.
Mhm.
But yes, it is a. There's something about being particular. Well, a few things. So first, it is the responsibility of someone who brings up probability. If you say, well, it's probably not going to be a good time down at the creek in the middle of the day, people can use realism or
To just
probability
shut
to
stuff
shut
down.
stuff
Yeah.
down. If you're going to use probabilistic thinking, it has to be for the sake of honoring the subject,
Yeah.
honoring the
Honoring
thing
the
in discussion,
request, right? Honoring
honoring the
the request.
request,
Right.
right? So I think you can have people who are possibility with people who are probability as shutting down, and they
Hmm.
just get stuck with one another, and
Yeah.
the relationships are in constant drama.
And I think that's why it can be hard to hear what we're saying and not just assume that we are trying to say there's no room for possibility,
Yes.
because which we aren't saying that.
Probability is for the sake of possibility.
Absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
that's
I
correct.
mean, so but I think people have been hurt. They've been hurt. So, and
Yes,
people unfortunately put other people down and make them feel like they can never do this. You never do that.
yes,
Which is horrible that people
yes,
do that to one another. But then they just start to believe that they are completely like they have, like they don't. Probability it also is for the sake of doing an
yes,
action and capacity actually. So, but yeah, people take that shutdown mode of another person doing that to them, and they say, oh, that's, well, that's horrible.
yes,
And then people will respond to that in sort of, they'll either just completely suppress themselves,
yes,
or they'll just eject button. They're like, I'm
yes,
not, and
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 people's
so
defense of the
yeah,
possible is very often out of hurt.
exactly. And so, again, if you hear a kind of this kind of critique of the leading
Yes.
with the possibility, that it could be like, but wait, like we want to like
We
have
wanna be
sky's the limit, and we
positive,
want to
we
be
wanna be
positive, and we
positive.
want to
Yeah.
make people feel like they can do anything.
Yes.
And it's like, well, you want to be careful though, because you don't want to end up damning somebody, essentially, like
Y
sending them off into hell
yes.
because you didn't like think about it. Actual, what are the
Yeah, what
determinations
are the
necessary, and what are the
determinations?
realities now
Yes,
you
yes.
must take into account,
Well, the
so
brain there's a sense in which the
yeah, that's it.
brain wants to believe in magic. It wants to
Mm,
believe that you can do anything and cast magic spells, and there's something about what we're just saying is that, let's say for the Christian, if you believe in incarnation, you really need to stress probability. Probability is believe creation is there,
mhm,
that determination is there, and that it is for you.
mhm,
That you honoring here's the key, you honoring determinations by taking reality into your thinking, your plans, if you want to say, that actually enhances the plan. Like,
yes.
you see, that's the key. Like, there's this idea, like, if you don't take creation into account, what you're doing is actually going to be less incarnational, less
Mhm,
alive,
mhm.
less participatory in
Yes,
creation.
exactly.
But the more there's a way in which when you're just thinking what could happen, impossibility, not really taking creation into account. You're kind of, in a sense, Gnostic, or I suppose
Absolutely.
pagan. There's a kind of magic. And so
Mhm.
what's very problematic is Christians, I think some Christians can hear, well, they can hear talk about the probable as if you're not believing God can do anything.
Right.
God, well, no, God can make it work out. God is all, and there's
In
actually
Christ,
a
all things are
way,
possible, right?
there
That
is
that
a
kind of
way in which God comes to function, to justify thinking only in terms of possibility, not probability, that the Christian can adopt and absorb, that leads them to associating probability with a lack of faith, a lack of belief, and
mhm,
actually anti Christian. As odd as that sounds, and I would argue it's the exact reverse, that probability is incarnational, is that
mhm,
you're actually believing God made creation and that it has a say,
mhm.
that you need to steward and work with creation, not just believe God's going to eclipse creation and so on and
Exactly.
so forth. So there's actually, in a very strange way, this distinction between possibility and probability, I think absolutely lurks in Christian cultures and contributes to Christians subconsciously associating taking probability into account. And I could even get into taking like logistics into account or engineering or quote unquote practical things, because although we'll critique autonomous, practical thinking that leads to a loss, like an autonomous rationality that's problematic, there is another sense where not taking the practical into account means you don't take creation into account, right? So you have to think that. And I do think a thing can happen with Christians and arguably people more generally, where like pragmatism, which is not quite the same as probable, but they can associate thinking the determinations improbable with a lack of faith. And therefore, in the name of faith, I think people set up dynamics in their relationships in life that just lead to endless conflict.
Mm. No, that's good. That's very good. And I was thinking about that a little more about this idea that, yeah, I think you're quite right. Where, um, gee, there was something else on my mind, but hopefully it will come back. But the point of the matter is that yeah, there's the idea of the eclipsing is very real, and I think there, if we take it seriously though, that in the Lord's Prayer it says, "On earth as it is in heaven,"
Yes.
that it's not just some out there. It's just going to all be right, and that means that we just accept that,
Yeah.
right now we just kind of get into these unfortunately drama situations with people in our lives, et cetera, et cetera. Like the reality is on earth as it is in heaven means on earth there's something that you're doing now
Yes.
that can actually have the potential to enact the
Yes.
almost the heavenly
Yes.
aura.
Yeah. Yeah.
and that
Mhm.
and so that means you actually that's when you need to start
Yeah.
paying attention, like,
Yes.
oh, you can do things better or worse,
Yes.
and we can't just always sort of say, well, we're just all fallen, so it's just all gonna,
Yes.
it's all
Yes.
just kind of, it could be great, it could be really nice if everything was just, everything was perfect, right?
Yes.
Like heaven, which I
Yes.
understand the sentiment, but we have to be careful that we don't forego or kind of disavow our own agency in that, to say, wait, we can actually, wait, we have the capacity to be incarnational in in a sense, allowing that kingdom work to be done,
But
right?
here's the great irony. The great question is like, wait, but if you're stressing the probable, you have less agency than if you stress the possible, don't you? Because if I'm unbound by determination, don't I have more
More
agency?
agency.
Don't I have more possibilities? So there's this idea that if you're free in Christ or free, then we shouldn't be so negative to be talking about how hot it will be. Because you also then, and this almost Nietzschean, you bring in ethics and say, well, we should be tough. And if it is tough, then it will be a good chance to grow. And you can never, and it's an internally consistent system and you never escape, right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons why possibility is so problematic, it's an internally consistent system.
Yes.
It's always
Yes.
self-justifying
Yes.
because it really could be fine.
Yes.
It always really could be fine. But
Yeah.
it's like we were saying the other night, it is simply a fact that a novice at, say, poker could, of course, beat a world champion poker player in a hand. But I would never be on the side of the novice over the entire game. Like, yes, at a given event or hand, the stress of possibility over probability might be fine. But I would never stress possibility over probability for the whole of life. I wouldn't take
Mhm.
that bet, if
Mhm.
you will. It's the same with
Mhm.
philosophy. A given event, you might be fine without philosophy, but I wouldn't want to take that for the whole. It's not,
Mhm.
as in a complex world. Um, there's a question here about what exactly is agency, right? Is agency free from determination, or do you have agency
Mm.
because God gave you a mind to think of the different possible scenarios and contingencies and to make decisions in
Mhm.
light of those things? Perhaps you can only have agency because there are determinations, not despite determinations, right?
Mm.
That God
Mhm.
gave us creation, that creation is a gift to us precisely so that agency would be possible,
Mm.
because otherwise it'd be nothingness,
Mm.
right? Just
Mhm.
us as a self-relating being, which
Yeah.
would mean we'd be like God without being God. So that's self-destruction.
Mhm.
That has to be gotten into. But there really is a way with the mind. Well, it's in belonging again too, and we talk about it all the time. The mind wants reality to be a dream. It has a
Yeah. Yep,
subconscious
yep, you said
desire
mhm.
that all determinations are like determinations in dreams. When you dream and you see a building, it's a determination. You didn't, you do. It's this weird thing where you didn't choose to see a building in your dream, did you? And yet another way you must have,
Yeah.
right? So imagine what happens in a dream. Okay,
Mhm.
a dream is wherever you don't choose what you dream, but in another way you do, don't you?
Yeah.
And in another way, here's the key: all the determinations in a dream actually are not binding. They don't bind you, do they? You're actually God over them in a certain sense, right? And yet, and that's why the name of it, lucid dreaming, is where all determinations are expression of your will. But even if you're not lucid, they nevertheless are, right? Bless you. The
Mm.
brain, in my opinion, drenched in libido, has a subconscious associate desire to make the waking world a dream, where all determinations are actually unbinding to agency. That's what we subconsciously want. And the Christian is kind of supposed to fight that natural fallen orientation of the mind and actually say, no, those determinations outside of my control are actually good.
Mhm.
Like it's a good creation. It's a great, it's beautiful. That's
He made
actually
it and he
for
said
me.
it is good, right.
It is
Mhm.
good. It's for me, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that means you
exactly,
have
exactly.
to resist. And the irony is that this basically campaign of the frenemy mind against the human being, against determination, to make us toward the world as if we're not bound by determination, which is the technological essence. Like AI is basically
Mm,
the continuation of dream equality, as I call it. Thoughts campaign to be equal with dream, to make
mhm,
all of being equal with dream. Like when the Christian starts talking about possibility over probability, you are falling into that demonic campaign. But then, of course, you'd say, but dreams aren't demonic. Well, they are if they're out of order. Like,
mhm.
yes, they are.
Okay,
Dreams become problematic fantasies unless it's
absolutely.
creation to dream, not dream to creation.
Yeah,
If you go dream to creation, the creation is an idol. If you go from creation to dream, then it can be an icon, if you
yeah.
will. Please.
No, that's tremendous, Daniel. So well said. And yeah, I just was thinking about how something to pay attention to in oneself is when you're getting adamant.
Yes.
It's funny because we typically get like we don't get adamant about doing the probable because it's kind
It's
of
very
it's
strange.
kind of
You would
boring. Like,
associate, but this is why we get tricked because we associate possibility with not being adamant. But it's the exact opposite. When people threaten your possibility, we naturally become very possessive and
oh
adamant.
yeah,
But when you stress the probable, well, it's reality. So it's not, you don't possess it so much. It doesn't give the same emotional
yeah.
response. But it's a great irony.
Yeah, actually, I think the scriptures that talk about, in a sense, linking God with, you can all things are possible,
Yes.
is actually important in the sense that we should actually put what's possible on the altar in a way.
Yes.
Like if you are willing to relinquish possible, not relinquish, but yeah, in a sense, kind of give it up.
In God, all things are possible.
Yeah, like you let it go in the sense that you trust that if it is, if you could, if you do the probable, that then the possible can also come
Yes.
forth.
That's what,
Like
yes,
it's
yes, yes,
because the thing is, we do get kind of possessive about the possible.
yes.
So if you pay attention to yourself, if you're getting adamant about it, well, you might be in possibility round, mere possibility round. You might be leading with possibility, not probability. Because again, like probabilistically, again, like it's so much tied to actually very specific direct actions you could take, but that feels like that doesn't feel as important. Like it's so easy to overlook that stuff because it's like, well, that's like that, or it can feel not boring, or like you can always just say in your head, well, I don't know if that really matters that much, but somehow, like, I guess I'm trying to, this is a nuanced and sort of difficult point to articulate here, but I'm going to try. Sometimes the probable, which you don't become adamant about because it's the stuff you could actually do. You see, you always want to push it to the
Yes.
to the idealization, the
Yes.
projection of the
Yes.
ideal.
Yes.
Okay, so that always kind of keeps it out of the realm of what you can actually do in your
And
agency.
there's something demonic about that.
Definitely. And but what's so funny is that sometimes the probable feels impossible. Like
Yes, it
it's
does.
the simplest stuff.
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
journal every day. Okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Just the
it's
simplest of
impossible.
stuff.
It's
Like it's
impossible.
it's just, I mean, simple, but somehow like you're everything in you is just like you're just like you're kicking and screaming like No, like, you
Yes.
don't wanna do the
Yes.
probable even though you could really probably do it if you just did it, and you
Yes.
don't,
Yes.
because you
Yes.
wanna keep everything in the in the, projection of the ideal, because
It's
that's like
yes,
so I
it's
don't I hope this
yes.
is making sense, but there's
It's
something
a
really
huge
interesting
issue.
here. Yeah,
It's very
yeah.
strange. We are very willing to do the possible, but not the probable,
Mhm.
which means we're very willing to self-sabotage. We're very willing, and it's a
1,000%.
demonic thing here, where we are more likely to think about the possibility of winning a Nobel Prize in literature, versus, but it's impossible. It's not probable to write every day or something, right?
Well, it's probable that you can, but it feels impossible,
Yeah.
or
So
you
what?
make it out to be impossible, or I never have time, I
Yeah.
never like, all
There's this
these things,
weird
all these
thing,
excuses
but
come
the
up.
reason why I think irony is in this because we use the possible
Mhm.
against the probable, which the probable would enable the possible. So we do
1,000%.
this every day of the week.
And when
And
we sit with the probable for a second, we somehow think we link it with impossibility
yeah,
somehow,
yeah, yeah, we do.
which is not in the good way, like, "Wow, you're
Yeah,
doing
but
the
you
impossible," but
yeah,
like
but you can start seeing this whole mystery of how you could take up your cross every day, but the burden is light. That doesn't make
yes,
sense. Well,
exactly.
because it turns out light things are freaking heavy. Well, they feel like crosses. Like it's really strange, but light things feel like persecutions. Like the probable that you can actually do feels impossible,
Mhm.
where the possible, which really is highly, incredibly unlikely, feels guaranteed. And
That's how
so,
our brain works,
yes, that's how our brain
right? Because
works.
we can kind of subsume it in the dream, right? It's almost
Yes,
ours, right? It's
yes,
through our it's
yes,
through ours already. So we
yes.
kind of have this again, that's where the possessive nature can come
Every
up with it.
time you take determination or the creation, determination just means a thing outside your control, like there's a car right there or whatever. Like every time your mind takes into account determination is a subconscious attack against dream equality. It's hunger to be a dream. Like you're saying, the world, the brain does everything in its power to try to forget that there's something outside of itself it has to honor.
Y-
It doesn't want to be incarnational. It wants to be God.
What's so fascinating is this idea about we want it to be a dream. This very mode of being, because actually it gets very chaotic, right? Like
Yes.
it's chaotic,
Yes.
you
And
get
dreams are
drama in your
chaotic. Yes.
relationships. Well, what I mean to say is that like and yeah, there's this a problem with wanting everything to be a dream. When you get it rightly ordered, then you can actually start to have visions and dreams for
Yes.
stuff.
That's
I
correct.
think that we self-sabotage in that arena of the possible and wanting to have it be like this dream state, and actually that undercuts like because that's so draining
Yes.
that there's absolutely no capacity and no energy
Nope.
for us to actually have dreams,
Nope. Nope.
so when you go
Nope.
back to the probable though, which seems so almost like it can't be that simple, right? But there's also something profound, like you're saying the burden is light, the yoke is easy. There's this kind of, oh, like it actually opens you up to dream again. Do
Yes.
you see the irony there? I think there's
Probability,
something,
yes.
I think because
Probability to possibility is vision. Vision to probability is dreaming. And you see, if you just dream in this sense, it's a
mhm,
major problem.
mhm,
But the problem is dreaming is more enjoyable. It is
yeah,
more libidinal, is more
libidinal, yeah,
fun
mhm,
than probability
mhm,
to
mhm,
possibility,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, because dreams are self-confirming. Dreams say you can do anything. Anything's possible. You can do anything. So it's confirming. Probability means you have to take something beyond you into account. And we do not
Mm.
like that. We do not naturally like that.
Well,
It
there's
takes a
also
lot of work.
so much fear because if you can keep it in the dream state,
You're
you can
safe.
you're safe,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to do anything. You
Hmm.
can just always just in the dream
Yes.
state, it's possible, right? Or it kind of like you almost trick yourself into thinking it happened. You never did anything
Oh,
about it,
that's a very common
and
thing.
so
Yes.
um, it's safer. Whereas if you start actually taking these direct steps
Uh-huh. It's
that in
dangerous.
the probable,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, what if
Yeah.
it doesn't work? What if
Yeah.
it does work?
And
What
people
if I
will
don't
see and then
like
people see
what
you
if
doing it and they judge your
yeah
use of time and
yeah
all that
yeah
other
yeah
stuff. I mean,
yeah
the other thing you were pointing to that's a really big deal is dreams are chaotic. But you
yeah
see, you don't notice because you just absorb them. People whose lives are where they constantly are thinking the possible, not the probable, they live chaotic lives. Like they're constantly in drama and chaos and like and different things are kind of coming up. And you see, here's the issue. If your thinking is always about the possible, then you're also exposed to the possible. So your life becomes chaotic because all of these things
What was that space? Sorry,
if you're
breaking.
if all of your thinking is about what is possible, then you're exposed to the possible.
Mm.
And then all these unexpected things occur and you have no control in the good way. You don't want control, but you do want to have the auto mastery of a steward. You want
Yes.
stewardship, and that's a kind of control, but not a
Mhm.
control of outcome,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So the issue is that when you lead with probability, you're not exposed to all of the possibilities, which will eventually override you and lead and overwhelm you.
You could maybe make a distinction here between being controlling, which is possessive,
Yes,
and like actually being
and
in
having
yeah,
control.
like
Yeah,
having
yeah,
control.
sure.
Like you do actually, like for example,
Yeah,
you actually are trying to if we talk about having the most optimal experience at the creek, you want a certain outcome, and
Yes.
that's okay.
Yes.
Like, you want to
Yes.
create that, but
Yes.
you're also
Yes.
taking you're you've got skin in the game, and
Yes.
you're having to work with determinations to actually make that a reality.
The
So
closer the thing in question, the more okay it is to have a plan. The way we, as you know, with Ivan Illich, we say, like, if you're planning to go to the Kroger's in 2 hours, the plan is fine. But when you're talking about 5 years from now, you need to prepare.
yes,
Like, but we tend to plan 5 years
5 years
into the
out,
future
and
and not prepare at
and
all,
yeah,
ultimately. So
yeah,
planning is perfectly fine, as long as you're talking in the immediacy.
mhm,
And so having an outcome in mind. So that's why probability in the immediate is fine because you have an outcome you're looking for, thriving, right?
yeah,
But here's the thing: the more you thrive, the more that becomes possible. That's why
absolutely,
possibility is second. Like, if you
absolutely,
haven't
and it
learned how to
yeah,
thrive today, how can you thrive tomorrow?
yeah,
And it turns out when you thrive, you gain virtue and different habits. You get
yeah,
better at interacting people. You
yeah,
become, I would argue, you become actually more productive. You have better energy. Well,
right,
as you, goodness, to gain all of that, then yeah, anything is possible. But
yes.
that's only because you put possibility second to thinking the probability necessary for you to thrive today.
Mm. No, that's all very good. And yeah, I mean, again, this is actually it's probability in service of like possibility is absolutely something that you want to uh have as a calculation, just that you want it to be from the foundational
Yes.
probability
Yes.
that then can unfold and birth the
Yes,
possible,
because there's a
because
weird because like possibility can be bad. Like a bad
oh,
thing
and
is
that's what I was gonna
possible.
say. I
Yeah,
was gonna say too, like, it's funny because we talk about this possible, like, this is why you want to be on your guard about this stuff.
exactly.
Because if you're doing this, like, leading with possibility, and probability is just nowhere in the picture, it's like
Yeah,
not even being considered
yeah. You're
whatsoever, and any
you're
consideration of it is,
you're
you get
assuming.
angry.
Yeah,
It's the be careful, because that thing that you're kind of like holding on to as like,
yeah,
I want to do this and this will be great and da 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 in the possibility space. Possibility is also where you have your paranoid fears,
yeah.
all of this, the
Yes,
crippling, paralyzing thoughts,
yes,
worries,
yes,
concerns,
yes.
all of that stuff is possibility too.
Yeah,
So
so
you
if you
really have
lead
to
with
be,
possibility, you're exposed to
yeah,
bad
yeah,
possibilities.
good,
So if
good, good luck,
so
because it's just difficult to
Yeah, good
navigate
luck.
those
So when
things for
possibility
sure.
is so here's the thing, when possibility is second to probability, it's a narrowed possibility. It's the thriving
Mhm.
possibility. When you lead
And
with probability, what's possible in the future is good and thriving. But
mhm.
if you lead with possibility, you're just exposed to the whole gamut and you get craziness.
Yeah, and actually there's this kind of, we don't always like, this is making me think of scripture, right? Like the narrow path, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Well, it's funny because actually what this is showing is, and this kind of makes me think of something that um will come up in the spaces I've talked about, right?
Yes.
Vessel Village, and
Yeah.
Corey Malloy and Rooted Families, and I mean, this is stuff you can also see, like, with just the language that's being used about this idea of like really focusing on yourself, which
Yes.
is which isn't like in a selfish way. It's saying like you can't control what your husband does or your
Yeah.
kids do or
Yeah.
this person does. You just need to focus on
You.
getting yourself
Yes.
in, like getting straight with what you are in control of, and
Which can
which is yourself.
inspire the people around you to
Exactly,
blossom
exactly.
differently.
But that feels like a narrowing, but actually that's for an expansion.
Yes.
Like, you have to see how those two things work together. And if you don't, you just think, well, that's narrowing, and
Yes.
we don't want narrow stuff,
Yes.
because we do want expansion in our lives. Expansion would be associated with abundant life and fullness and joy and all of the, all those wonderful things. Well,
Yes.
you get expansion because you're actually willing to, you know, stop being in everybody else's business, basically.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
Well,
it's important. It's really important because, and I think how it relates to the scripture, often it's kind of thought of as like, when it talks about like, wide is the road that leads to destruction, but narrow is the
yeah.
road that leads to light.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of just see that as like, well, that seems really exclusive,
Yeah.
which obviously can be an
Yeah.
interpretation. But if we link it with this stuff,
Yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh,
Yes. Yeah.
that so makes so much more sense. Like,
Yes.
and I know that could be maybe thinking, somebody could say that's a little bit of an extraneous
Yes, but it's the
interpretation,
logic
but I
is
think the logic is
isomorphic.
isomorphic, absolutely,
Yeah.
and it's really in that way. It's like, oh, that makes so much sense. That. Oh, yeah, that's it. That it's kind of like talking about it being the probable for the sake of life, which is actually extremely expanded and extremely wide and vast and all of that. So,
Yes.
anyways, I'm gonna
There was a
let
few
you.
things.
Yeah,
First, everyone, these cups with the bottom that you can put. When I saw this, it changed my life. These are amazing.
mugs.
It's so
Yeah,
amazing.
get tea and
Yeah, it's
coffee.
yeah, exactly. So second, this idea of all things are possible in Christ. Usually that's in the context of like a challenge, like a difficult thing, right? It's like, in Christ, all things are possible, but that doesn't mean you don't consider the probable to succeed at that thing. right? But, you know, that those kind of phrases are often in
Mhm.
regard to things people are not even willing to start, right? But it's like, no, all things are possible in God, so be willing to try it. That doesn't mean don't consider the realistic variables, if you will, right? The second thing too, I do think Christians unfortunately have been captured often by a thinking of possibility that is basically Gnostic, that
Mhm.
and I think this crowds out Christians who are, say, I think economics. I think the entire economic system can participate in kingdom work, but it's a system of probability. But you can't think that if you're stuck in possibility. You just see it as a restriction. I think basically all jobs outside of basically spaces where people like the Holy Spirit can move, which of course
Mhm.
the Holy Spirit can move everywhere, but people tend to emphasize the church or missions or things like that. You're like, you need to do a job where the possible is there, right? But if you have a job that's focused on, you know, the probable or making water flow or whatever, that can almost be seen kind of a step down.
Mhm.
I think this confusion about the possible and probable contributes to
Mhm.
that in a very bad way. Um, the third thing I was going to say is I suppose I would note, I had something else, but I would note is that I think people who are exposed to the possible are completely at the mercy of desire and libidinal.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is the thing, like people like their
1000%.
life is basically directed by how they feel. And dreams are very libidinal, extraordinary libidinal. Like when you are just thinking in terms of possible, not the probable, you're bringing that kind of libidinal drenched way of being from the dream into your daily life. And you're going to just follow basically desire, which this doesn't mean desire is bad, but it means you're probably going to end up in bad relationships or doing bad things because you felt, you know, you're going to end up in a lot of chaos. Like your life is way more led by the libidinal and not a good way. Now you would say, oh, you saying, you know, desire and all of that is bad. No, probability is how you get the fullness of desire.
Mm.
Probability is how
You honor it, right? Like you
probability
said.
is how you have things happen in your life that you didn't even know were possible, that
Yes.
you desire far more than the things that were given by your immediacy
Mhm.
before. It's
Mhm.
like, you know,
Mm.
Kreeft has that idea of like, you know, if you told a child about sex, I think, and the child is like, but is there chocolate? Do you get to eat
Oh, in
chocolate?
heaven?
Yeah,
Oh,
like, you
is there
know,
sex in heaven?
or
Yeah.
yeah, or this idea. Yeah, that was a great lecture by Peter Kreeft, actually. But this kind of idea that the child, you know, you're talking about heaven and the child is like, but is there chocolate in heaven? Kind of this idea that they can't even think, you know, pleasure without chocolate, right? You know, so they can't imagine heaven being heaven unless there's chocolate. But there's kind of a laugh because it's kind of like, you know, you're not going to be too worried about chocolate if you get heaven,
Mm.
right? So with, you know, the other examples like sex and chocolate, is so
You mean like
likewise,
the adult would ask, like,
yes,
but
yes,
wait, in
is
heaven
there
is there
chocolate?
sex for
Yeah,
the adult? They're
yeah,
like
the
thinking
adult can
they're
ask that
like
as well,
like
right?
from their perspective, it would
Yes,
be
is
like,
there
well, what is
sex
there
in
sex in
heaven,
heaven? Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
likewise, there's a way in which when you put the possible before the probable, you're like the child worried about chocolate in
In
heaven, or
heaven.
the adult worried about sex in heaven.
Mhm.
But when you put the probable first, you're actually open to fullnesses of joy that you can't imagine at the time.
Yeah, that's all really good. Um, yeah, there's a lot of like kind of different connections you could make with like what is the possible isomorphic to versus the probable,
Yeah,
you know. Um, but yeah, I think too, there's something about possibility that, like I was saying, we can kind of when it happens in the moment, we can only associate it with like you're saying, just this like libidinal
yes,
energy. Oh, right, with the desire, right, 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 right. Because I think yeah, the funny thing is that what we have to realize is that a lot of times we are desiring something that we are not taking full responsibility for.
correct.
And so it's not simply about desire, it's about your mode of being
Mm,
and what you're doing with that desire and how much you're willing to start to actually have a stake, like have your
Yep,
skin in the game on that
yep,
desire, et cetera, et cetera.
yep, yep.
You know, the libidinal just wants this like all the good stuff, but it doesn't want to have to take into consideration the realities and the
Right,
determinations, you know.
that's right.
Again, the probable, again, it's there's something about it that's just so crucial. Oh, I guess this is the thing too, just really quick. Like it's, you know, because it's like, okay, in the birth control mindset, there's like less babies, but we're the babies. Like
Well, you
truthfully,
get
you
irony.
get you
There's
yeah,
infinite
yeah,
irony.
because there can be an infantilization in not considering the probable. If you're always in
Almost by
possibility,
definition.
yeah, and you're and the reason why I think I find it important to talk about is that this impacts people like you're saying every single day of the week
Constantly.
and constantly in especially in families and marriages in like
Mhm.
interpersonal relationships. This just gets people in trouble all the time.
Well, you
You
have
know,
the families together talking about what you're gonna do at Christmas. and people are talking about possibilities, and or somebody is talking about what's probable to work. Okay, we'll pick this person up here, we'll do that, and so on and so forth. And somebody says, well, can we also go to the store? And the person says, well, we're probably not going to have time before the airport falls. And it's like, well, why not? Do you not want to go? Like, boom, fight, right? Like when you get like, and also the more people like, the likelihood, there's a real sense in which the likelihood planning and coordination works is to the degree that everyone involved is thinking in terms of probability, not possibility. But in a world that doesn't have that distinction, the more people you gather, the higher the likelihood you have someone who's going to bring in
Yeah.
possibility. And that throws the whole thing into chaos because possibility is indeed always possible. And so you can't disprove that person, if you will,
Yeah,
right? So they
yeah.
always have a
It's an
point.
internally consistent
It's an
system,
internally
isn't it?
consistent
Yeah.
system. It's the distinction between possibility and probability is a defense against falling into an enclosure, falling into an internally consistent
Wouldn't you
system.
say that like possibility is kind of almost like map and probable is territory?
In a
Kinda?
certain degree,
Yeah, I
yes.
mean, that might be a little far, but
You're
it's a
trying to map. To think probability is trying to map according to the territory, not just draw a map
map and
separate
just
from the territory, right? But the
here's
brain
my pot of gold and
But
here's
in a dream, the map equals the territory. Like whatever you come up with is reality in a
yeah.
dream. And that's what we want. That's like the ultimate libidinal desire of the brain, which the Lacan and others are right, that we have to think the brain not separate from desire, but drenched
Oh
in it.
yeah.
The ultimate desire of the brain is to have the map equal the territory. Whatever it comes up with is reality. And that is constantly leaking into our actions without us realizing it. In philosophy, there is a very real sense in which philosophy is about not falling into dream equality. It is about not letting the brain basically win in its campaign to make the map equals the territory. Philosophy is about keeping the map not the territory, which is insanely hard to think because you don't have access to the territory. So dream equality has a kind of handicap in its favor. And so we have to come up with all of these distinctions and have all of these conversations constantly to work against that handicap that dream equality has in its favor. And the work can't stop because just as soon as it stops, dream equality is here. It's coming. And AI is the economic fulfillment of dream equality. But that's all belonging into too. I did want to stress, and I'll throw it to you, and I know we're
Yeah.
short on time.
Yeah.
I think Christians and people in general are so drenched in this bias for the possible against the probable that it is a massive problem. I think that
Like this shows up a lot
this
more than
shows
we
up
realize.
everywhere. I think we basically are just I think Christians are remarkably stuck in thinking possibility is holy and thinking probability is man of the world. If I think
Yeah.
probability, I'm of the world, but the Christian thinks possibility and they're in the world but not of it. They literally associate probability with like questioning what God can accomplish. And I think there's also people do it in relationships because they're questioning how much you love them or something, like or how much you care or how much you're concerned of making sure they're happy, right? If they bring in the probable, well, I thought you loved me. And that might sound absurd, but this happens constantly. Like if you love me, you'd make the possible happen. That's what people are doing constantly. Like if
What
you really love me.
Well, that's again, that's the infantilization, right? What's possible, but I don't want to do anything toward actually making that a reality. I just want you to serve it to me
Yeah, well,
on a
that's what
silver
it will
platter.
happen.
I just want you
Right.
to make it happen
Yes.
for me. Like that's the other thing too. We have to realize when our possibility is really externalizing that like that
Well,
coming to
because the
pass, like
other
that.
becomes part of the dream too. They're
Yeah,
just part of your dream
yeah,
serving you. Everything in the dream is you. And so the other just they're just serving your dream ultimately.
yeah,
And in that sense, not truly other.
yeah, yeah. No, that's spot on. And there was something too really quick about so what was it about dream, desire, oh,
Equality.
that's what I was gonna say. What's so funny there is that, you're saying like probability gets sort of down,
Yeah.
denigrated to like, oh, that's just
Man.
man, right?
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that like we said, possibility on almost more of a psychoanalytical perspective is more of the libidinal.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so
So the Christian
what's
sets
fun
themselves up to fall into the
to their
very old,
flesh, right?
yeah,
Like
to
the
the
flesh,
flesh.
yeah. And actually, like that's why I think, and I have sometimes had like, and I don't know what the Greek word is. I've said that last time in the lukewarmness, but I do think there can be problematic interpretations of the use of the word flesh in the Bible in
Oh
the New
yes. Oh
Testament because
yes.
I think we get a lot. This is where look. This is in a sense this can kind of be where it comes from, right?
Yeah,
The
sure.
incarnational, the fleshy, the
We're very
flesh, like
confused.
the creation, like we shouldn't like that's that's going to subvert us from God's will or something like that, or the possibility of that all that's possible
Yes.
in Christ or whatever.
Yes.
When really we like Christ became a man, like God became a
Yeah.
man. He
Yes.
became a body, a person, and so it's just like. we have to be very careful with that because what happens is unintentionally when we're not getting into like basically the weeds of what these terms mean and what it actually actually plays out, that feeds the libidinal energy. The very kind of the fleshly desires and then the fleshly pitfalls and pitting each other against each other and drama and whatever
It's a mess. It's a complete mess.
anger and all of
Yes,
that stuff.
yes,
So it's
it's a
just
major problem.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
mean,
really
and
yeah.
also too, I would even say, because even in field like missions and things like that, like, or let's say arts, another problem is because it's always possible that God uses anything that removes the imperative for excellence. Because
Absolutely.
God can use bad art just as much as he can use good art or something, right? And likewise, an extremely well coordinated missions trip is not necessarily better than one that's not well coordinated because God can use anything. You get this confused.
Mhm.
It contributes to believing excellence is bad. It contributes to actually having a bias against excellence. And again, obviously, I've critiqued and had concerns with like things like missions, but this isn't because it's the ethos, it's the philosophy, it's the worldview that can kind of form around missions and various Christian efforts that actually end up, in my opinion, Gnostic and pagan
Yeah.
unintentionally
Yeah.
because they have these problematic conflations of possibility is holy, probability is not. And
Yeah.
again, people, language can be used in different ways and so on and so
Sure.
forth. That then actually, in my opinion, keeps the fullness of, say, missions from
Yeah.
coming out. Because if you realize that thinking probability is really important, I would argue you'd have better missions.
Yeah.
You'd have
Right.
better emphasis on fundamental values, et cetera, so forth, right?
Mm.
But when you're just thinking the possible, you don't do these things well, and it creates
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah. And therefore it's not a slight on missional efforts. It's just
No,
about the mode.
it's the
And
mode. It's
yeah,
the
because
mode.
again, this is actually for optimal. It's
It,
not
it and
it's
it
it's
would make
for
sense if if you believe in spiritual warfare. It would make sense
mhm.
that the demonic would target the missions first to make them paganistic, to make them like Gnostic, because that's
Right.
the
Yeah.
the the leading edge, right?
Yeah.
So you would want to make that fall into a problematic metaphysic.
Yeah. No, 100%.
But I know we're out of time, so
Yes.
yes, I do think again. Um, I think many lives are basically stuck in loops and enclosures and patterns they can't get out of because they're
Mhm.
stuck thinking possibility, not probability. And
Oh,
I and
sorry.
and I don't think you can get out of those without the distinction often.
Really quick. I think this also sets people up a lot for disillusionment as well because
Completely.
if
Ironically, the stress on possibility absolutely sets you up to feel powerless.
ironically.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think too, there's also a lot of confusion. Well, if God can do like, this also, if say the loved one doesn't make it through or
Yeah,
whatever, like,
that's right.
you're like, there's a lot of confusion
Yeah,
versus thinking about the fact that like probabilities in service of possibility,
yes.
and that actually the incarnate God is in touch with creation,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so are we to be. Anyways, I
I
just think
think
there's a
that's a
lot of
very
this.
good point because when you're in the possibility realm, someone gets sick and dies, you have to like, why didn't God save them or whatever, right? But if God honors probability, then possibility has to follow from what is
Follow
possible,
from
and
exactly.
God's not just going to violate, probability, right? Now that gets into the theology of miracles and things like that. But
Exactly. I was
again,
gonna say
I don't think you can think that topic without the distinction between
yes.
probability and possible. You just get lost in this vague sense of possibility that then devastates your faith when something bad happens.
Exactly. Well, and that goes back to the chaotic nature. It's just kind of random. It kind
It's
of
just random.
just sort of
Yeah,
feels random, and then you just sort of accept. Well, it's God's choice, or in a sense,
yeah,
you kind of
just God's choice. That's right.
which then you're kind of like, does God did well?
God will the
It's
evil,
yeah, and
Allah
he
Akbar,
doesn't.
whatever.
He doesn't like he doesn't.
Yeah, but
And
but explain it then. And if you
exactly.
don't have the distinction, I mean, that gets into that
There's a
subject.
lot more there, but
And
yes,
Austin
it's
Farrow is very
important.
good. I
It's really
like Austin
important
Farrow on that.
on
But
miracles on
yeah, on evil and all of that.
uh
Leibniz, he has a tremendous book on Leibniz. But yes, I think ironically, in the name of defending the possible, you can set people up for deconstruction
I think
and not
so.
even mean to.
Yeah,
Versus yes, because ironically, what ends up happening is miracles like Christians can get a theology of miracles that contributes to dream equality because
yeah,
everything's
exactly.
everything around you is actually practically a dream, even if it's not technically a dream, because God can miraculously change anything. Then everything's reality is tentative. You see what I'm saying? Everything's reality is tentative.
But this kind of makes me think about like the nuance of what we were talking about with emergence, where you're just kind of
Uh-huh.
sitting around waiting for emergence, which
Yes.
then actually makes you captured into the emergency,
Yes.
and
Yes.
also
Yes.
you're not actually doing the active participation in emergence. Because I think, like for example, like if you think about this as it relates to I don't know. Say you see two loved ones that like you want their relationship to be better or something
Yes.
like that. Well, um you just kind of think, well, in Christ all things are possible.
Yeah.
So maybe
So one day,
one day, maybe
yes,
just
one day.
they'll love,
It'll
they'll
just
feel
change.
the
And
love
is
again
that
or whatever.
possible? Of
Yeah.
course. But is it probable when they're stuck in a self-relating enclosure? No.
And also because the thing is possibility doesn't the work, the daily little moment to moment work
Yes.
is in the probable because that's what you probably can do.
Yes.
The possible can always stay, like we said, it's an abstraction. This projection of the ideal, which is always
Yes.
tomorrow, right? It's
It's
always
always tomorrow.
yeah, and or it's this kind of I'm gonna want it, want it, want it, want it, and then I'm gonna be frustrated when somebody doesn't let me do it,
But
or I do it and it didn't, it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. So it's like
this also gets so we gotta go.
yeah, we
This
do.
also gets tied
I'm
into a
sorry.
theology of the second coming, because if you have
Oh,
a belief that at any
1000%,
moment God's going to break
1000%.
through, then it's always possible at any moment, anything can change, and et cetera, et cetera.
We don't wanna have to yeah, anything can change. No, yes, but and what are we doing to change? Like, what are we doing to
Yes, but
change,
even and if of course at any moment God can break through, but that doesn't justify an entire lifestyle, an entire way of being organized around Deus ex machina.
But what if God could change it all and we couldn't recognize it?
Of
Like we
course,
talk
you
about a
can get
lot.
all to
Well,
that.
it's like, they want signs and miracles and stuff.
Yes,
But like, can you even if you're
yes,
not basically what I'm saying is if you're
yes.
not
If you
calibrating
haven't done
yourself
the daily work,
toward the miracle
yeah,
as being that in your
yeah,
being,
yeah.
then how would you even be able to recognize
Yeah, I
it?
think Peter Rollins has a story about the
Yeah.
second coming happening and nobody noticing, because
Oh gosh.
they weren't
But
prepared. They weren't
huh.
doing the work of probability each day
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There is an assumption that if the Holy Spirit shows up, you'd have to notice, and that removes the need to work on your eyes every day, if you will, right?
Mhm.
That assumption I would question. The Bible says angels are there, you didn't see them, right? So why would that not apply to other things? Now, of course, I think when the Holy Spirit shows up in the most intense of all possible forms, the mystical vision, you can't deny it.
Absolutely.
But that I think it might be a mistake to assume that that's the only way the Holy Spirit shows up. I think it basically, when we've talked a lot about mysterious energy, I
Yeah,
think those are on the same gradient, not the same
absolutely.
intensity. And then, of course, if a mystical experience happens to you, but you haven't been doing the daily work, the next day you forget about it, or the change doesn't last, or stuff like that. You know what I'm
Mhm,
saying?
mhm,
So I don't even think in I don't even think in that event thinking you're justified to stress possibility
mhm,
over probability. And yes, I mean that also gets into why I prefer and stress Alex Ebert's work on limit versus the speculative Melissu on speculative realism that stresses contingency. I think stressing contingency is a mistake versus encountering limit. But
mm,
again, I do think the Christian has theologies based on the miracle, second coming, and I think there are ways to think that are more incarnational, but that's another topic. But I do think that is all in the background that basically sets the Christian up to participate in dream equality, which I think is a demonic campaign, basically at the
mhm,
end of the day. And another way to look at it, it's a way of giving in to Satan's temptations in the wilderness. Because basically all Satan tempts Jesus with is accomplishing everything he's going to accomplish, but not through the cross. Not through determination. Right? Dream equality
I'm
is
so glad you said that.
basically
When we talked about this
yeah,
off recording, I that's exactly where my mind went to.
yeah.
It's possible, you
If
could do that.
yeah, it's
Look,
possible.
do this, and you'll have,
Everything without
yeah,
the cross,
yep.
right?
But see, Satan's tempting with the possible,
Yeah,
not the
not the
probable, not
probable,
the
right?
probable.
And the probable is also tied to God's will.
Mm,
And it's like Jesus is like, well, God's will is for me to go through the cross. And there's a way to say that God's will in creation is for us to go through creation, go through determination. There is a sense in which creation functions like the cross.
mm,
It is, that's there's bad things happen. There's evil in
yeah.
it. There's death, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
creation has a kind of function to the subject like the cross. And as Jesus had to go through the cross, we have to go through creation, go through determination, right?
Yeah, and I think there's something really cool about the symbol of the cross where, if you it's kind of like X marks the spot.
Yeah,
Like
sure.
I often think about it that way too, where carrying your cross is actually just to be able to actually be on X mark. Like you actually, instead of again delaying and foregoing and kind of keep it in this
Yes,
projection state of the ideal, you actually get into the concrete of what
yes.
this is X marks the spot. So
Yes.
do it, be it, go
Yes,
through it,
but you have to be
carry it.
prepared. Jesus' entire life is arguably preparation and probability and all of that
Hmm.
versus mere
Hmm.
possibility. And that has to be expanded on. But I guess I was also going to say is if I ask you, is the cross wonderful? It doesn't fit into that category. It's pretty terrible, but also wonderful. Likewise, if I
Yeah.
ask you, is creation wonderful? Well, it's full of evil and it's kind of terrible, but it also is wonderful, right? So I think there is now, this has to be expanded on, but there is some sort of parallel
Mm,
between how creation functions for the Christian and how the cross functions for Jesus.
mm,
There is something cosmic about the cross. It is not merely a cross, it is participating in the entire creative order, right?
mm,
So I don't think it's a stretch to say there's something about creation that functions like the cross, but you can't say the cross is inseparable from the tomb and the resurrection. It all gets
mhm,
mixed, right?
mhm,
So it happens in creation. But that means you have to treat as Jesus had to treat the cross as necessary
mhm,
against Satan's temptation of dream equality, I would argue. So we have to treat creation as real, as something we have to go through and not give in to temptations of dream equality. And that means you think in terms of probability, not possibility, because it's God's will for you to go through creation. Well, that means you take it into account in your thinking. And again, I think this massive mistake of Christians to emphasize the possible and to associate any consideration of the probable as not having faith
mm,
has been extremely costly.
mm,
And it trickles into relationships in many, many other
mm.
areas. So,
Yeah, that's all great, Daniel. There's so much symbolism with the cross. Oh my gosh, there's
yeah,
so much there.
yeah,
Just really quick, and it's a little abstract, but we were talking about the map
yeah,
and like, oh, I'll just make it how I want, and
yeah,
like, there's my little X marks the
yeah,
spot. Well, the cross says to carry that X marks the spot. Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
be
yeah,
in your
yeah.
being, like you carry it with you. You become that, not seek it out and like hope to find it on your map, and then get frustrated when
Oh,
suddenly
yes.
it's the thing you kind of wanted to be always out of reach you got, and then you weren't satisfied. It's like, no, 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 take up your cross, like
Yeah,
take the X marks the spot, with like become it, take it with you, carry it with you. I don't
yeah,
know, there's a lot there, there's a lot
yeah, there
symbolically
is.
there that's kind of interesting to me,
I,
because X marks the spot is usually where the treasure is,
yes. I
right?
mean,
That's
I
where the
guess
treasure
as you
is.
were speaking, I'm now thinking that there's some kind of Spanish phrase or whatever that's kind of like this idea that it's not that walking, it's not that walking is made for paths. All paths are made by walking.
Mm,
And the
mm,
cross would have you make a path from walking, not giving you a path that you walk, right?
exactly.
And yet and you would say, well, don't we stay in the path of God's will? Well, God's will is the taking up of the
The cross,
cross.
exactly.
But that opens the possibility of all
Exactly.
the places you can go with
Exactly.
that cross, right? So
Exactly.
that's how God's will is narrow but expansive,
Exactly.
because you
Same.
have to take up the cross, but if you do, anything is possible,
Hmm.
right? So that's probability to possibility. Whereas if you say in Christ all things are possible, so I don't take up the cross, well, now you can't go anywhere. You're bound to the internally consistent system. You're bound to the preset paths, right?
I don't take up the cross in that, oh well, Jesus did it for me kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that's right. That's another danger, is that you end up being like, well, we don't have to because Jesus had. Well, that's where, is Jesus a model? Or, is he a model of what you're supposed to do? That if you are like that model, you participate in something greater that Jesus' death enables? Or is it a pure substitution in every sense, right? And that gets into
Substitutional
that
well, yeah, yep.
conversation, which is larger. But basically,
Yeah.
you take up your cross. If you prepare and you go through the work of probability, you can
Yeah.
take up your cross, and now
Yes.
all things are possible. Whereas if you say all things are possible, therefore I don't need to take up the cross, you're closed. You just have to follow the internal consistency of your map, and the only things possible are what are given by your immediacy, and you will rage against those things in your enclosure, and nothing will come of it. But for more by OJ Rose, please, Amazon, with books.
We
Reviews
have
are,
books,
they're
yeah.
neat. We appreciate it. And the Spotify, you're gonna put
Yeah.
up those
I
recordings.
yeah, I'll
Now
do
it's
that.
on. Yeah,
Now
now
I
you
have
will.
to.
Now I know that's exactly right. But you are prepared for that determination to respond to it in a manner that opens up possibility, and YouTube, stuff like that,
Yeah.
Instagram.
Instagram.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time. Bye.